Welcome back to Bookview TV. Now, we're talking this week with Wales-based author David Thorpe about his science fiction thriller Hybrids. This is a book where Britain is under quarantine and children suffer from a disease where they merge with their technological devices. Now, David, you do a lot of writing. You write for Marvel Comics. You helped create the Earth Scan series, the nonfiction series for the Center for Alternative Technology. How big a leap was this for you into narrative science fiction?
To be perfectly honest, I prefer writing fiction to writing non-fiction because you can just create your own world, create your own characters, and I write to find out often just what's going to happen next. So it's a voyage of exploration. If I'm writing non-fiction, for instance, every morning I have to write a couple of news items for an online environmental news service. I'm either doing reportage or I'm trying to get across serious points, and often they might even have a ideological intent behind them, be green. Whereas with fiction, the point is to let your imagination run riot within the confines of the story world that you created there for yourself. So it's actually a lot more fun.
At what point did the creative process begin here? We're talking chicken or egg time. Which came first, the great story or the various characters?
The story world generally came first, and then that had its own rules. And then the characters came, and then from the characters came their story, because that is basically how story is generated, from what the characters need and want.
Let's talk a little bit about the characters you've created. Is there one that is at least, shall we say, semi-autobiographical, or with whom you most personally identify?
Well, I guess it has to be Johnny Online. He is a half computer, and I feel the same way myself quite a lot. For instance, I use a microphone to dictate when I write into my computer, and I've done that for about 15 years now. Because I had a carpal tunnel syndrome operations on my wrists because it became too painful to type, and that itself was through using technology too much. So I'm writing very much from personal experience.
What's the attraction of Johnny?
He's very vulnerable. He admits his vulnerability. He's kind of quite shy, and you want him to come out with himself. But he's someone who, if he can manage to get in touch with the power that lies within him, can achieve great things. He kind of inspires other people around him almost just by being himself, but he doesn't really. The point of his story arc is it takes him a long time to realize the power that he has. And without giving too much away about the full narrative arc, because this Hybrid is book one of a trilogy, and the full story arc would be revealed at the end of the trilogy. He achieves something that I would love for every or any teenager in this country to be able to achieve. If the book is ever published, if the film is ever made, if the TV series is ever made, then you'll find out what that is. But what I'm trying to do with Johnny as well is to inspire kids and adults too, because a lot of adults read the book, to find that power within themselves and not rely on other people to do things for them.
Talk a little bit about the creative process that you go through to create these characters. Some of the other characters they're all very unique. How did you build each of these characters one by one?
Originally, there were a group of 5 hybrids. And I had the idea of telling a much lighter story, really, about 5 kids with these kind of various technologically enhanced powers engaged in various struggles and battles. But then I thought, actually, it's going to be more interesting if I choose the 2 most engaging of those characters and most deep of those characters. And that's how I picked on Kastrella and Johnny. Let's talk a little bit about Kastrella.
Yeah, please do, because I'm curious about her background. The rebellious daughter of a Japanese pharmaceutical executive looking for a mother, and there seems to be a lot of conflict there with her.
Yes. First of all, her name actually came from someone who I knew who was called Kestrel, and she was a a French gypsy background, okay, and there was nobody else I'd ever come across with that name, and I actually Googled it, and then I thought about adding the LA to it to give it a bit more of a feminine and interesting flavour, and I Googled that, and nobody else had that name either, so I thought, right, I'll use that. And then I'm kind of thinking, she's got a French mother, let's make her into a model, but let's make her a bit dysfunctional, and then her father was Japanese because I wanted to interest the Japanese market. Let's talk quite cannily about this, and have a reference to manga and anime and all that stuff that I love. And then I made him, of course, the marketing director of a multinational pharmaceutical company that is making some of the drugs which the hybrids use to treat themselves. And so there's a lot. By putting all that there into Kastrella's background, there's a lot for her to have to deal with. Her parents are separated, her mother's disappeared, and she has to go on a voyage of discovery to find out exactly what her father's up to, what her mother's up to, in the same way that teenagers, as they reach maturity, start to look at their own parents in a completely different way than they did when they were, say, 7, 9, 10 years old. And the same journey is true for Johnny as well. He discovers his parents in the course of his story arc. His mother works for the very organisation which is keeping hybrids prisoners, and his father also has an extremely interesting background that I don't want to reveal, and that's part of where Johnny's power comes from too. So really, you have to load the characters up with a lot of features and characteristics. One of my favourite writers is the man Paul. I forgot his second name, but he came up with the Shameless TV series. And he once wrote or said something that he generally, when he's creating a character, he puts 3 characters into one, and that gives them sufficient complexity to generate the interest and engagement that you want as a writer.
What a great writing tip there. There was so many other interesting characters there. I mean, you've got, Malcolm and Aunt Cherie, who are family members, but of course on opposite sides of the spectrum. The Malcolm character kind of reminded me like the DEA agent brother in the HBO series Breaking Bad. And Syl, the sister-in-law, Aunt Cherie, runs Salvation House trying to save the hybrids. Are any of these characters based on people either you or we would know in real life or are in your life?
Cherie, yeah, I visited the Lighthouse in London, which is a hospice that cares for people who have AIDS. So that's very much where Salvation House comes from. Major Winter is gay, and his ambivalence towards his job is really important in giving him depth. He's kind of a liberal guy in charge of a group, the Gene Police, who have to go around being quite nasty to other people. But he doesn't really like being nasty. But he keeps on doing the job because if he didn't, he figures somebody else nastier than him would have that job. So he goes through a progressively harder time as the story goes on, as he's pushed and pushed and pushed by those beneath and above him to do things, more and more things that he disagrees with, until what's interesting is at what point does he then flip and say, I can't do this job anymore. This is not what I signed up to do when I joined the army or the police. I'm out of here.
Well, when we return with part 3 of our interview with David Thorpe, we're going to look into these Gene Police a little bit further, talk about the future of this project and how he hopes these characters live on in a television series treatment he's prepared. You're watching Bookview TV with Dennis Campbell. Stay right here.